I was sipping lemonade on my back porch, watching my sprinkler system water the rose beds in perfect sync, when I heard it, the unmistakable screech of Karen's voice echoing over the fence like a raccoon caught in a blender. I set the glass down, walked to the edge of my yard, and froze. There, not 5 feet from my property line, was my garden hose, my locked, clearly labeled, definitely not for Karen hose, snaking through a gaping hole in the wooden fence and gushing water all over a group of shrieking party guests. A child was using it like a slip and slide. An adult man, in what looked like a silk robe, was getting sprayed in the face while 2 women laughed hysterically. Karen stood tall in the middle of it all, holding the nozzle like she was commanding the fire department. That was the exact moment I decided. If she wanted a backyard spa, I was going to give her one, with pressure straight from the sewer line. 3 days earlier, life had been blissfully quiet. I had just installed a new irrigation management system, complete with smart sensors, timers, and a weather integration module. It wasn't just about keeping the grass green. It was about creating a sanctuary. After years of living in cities, I had finally bought a property with enough yard to grow lavender, tomatoes, and peace of mind. Karen, unfortunately, was the storm to my calm. She lived next door, ran an unofficial HOA-like campaign of rules, and treated her fence line like a suggestion rather than a boundary. It all began when she knocked on my door wearing a yoga set that looked more tactical than athletic. She flashed a clipboard and asked, politely at first, if she could borrow my garden hose for a small event she was planning. I declined kindly. I explained that my hose was connected to a smart pressure irrigation grid, and manual detachment would mess up the system. She didn't seem pleased but smiled that tight, fake smile and left. I thought that was the end of it. The next morning, I found footprints in my mulch and my hose slightly uncoiled. That's when I mounted the first outdoor camera. Just a simple one near the faucet, discreet but efficient. I chalked it up to coincidence, maybe wind. But deep down, I had a feeling. That Saturday, the truth drenched itself into my life. Karen had organized a backyard spa-themed party for what appeared to be every middle-aged wine club in town. There were tiki torches, cucumber water pitchers, and inflatable lounge chairs with frilly cup holders. I wouldn't have cared. Truly, people can party how they want. Except halfway through the afternoon, I noticed the water pressure inside my home had dropped drastically. My shower barely trickled. My kitchen faucet spit at me. Confused, I checked the water main and then glanced out the kitchen window. That's when I saw it. The hose was gone. Vanished. I stormed outside and traced the path where it had once laid. The fence had a section where 2 boards were missing, and sure enough, the hose had been pulled straight through. I peered over and caught sight of Karen, holding the nozzle and directing a high-pressure blast at a woman in a pink sun hat. "Don't worry, it's filtered," she yelled. The crowd cheered. My jaw hit the turf. I walked around to her front gate, knocked once, and let myself in. Karen spotted me and came over with a plastic smile and a margarita. "You're just in time for hose yoga," she said. I was too stunned to reply. I asked, firmly, why she took my hose. Her reply was a mixture of entitlement and condescension. "Oh, relax, it's just water. You weren't even using it. I figured we could share for today." Share. As if backyard plumbing was a neighborhood bake sale. That night, I sat at my desk, hose coiled back into place, hands trembling with restrained fury. I re-watched the footage. Her guests lined up like a spa queue, water wasting in arcs across my lawn and over my fence. That's when I decided it wasn't enough to confront her again. She had broken boundaries. She needed a lesson she'd never forget. That's when the idea hit me. What if the next time she tried to steal my hose, it didn't give her clean water? What if it gave her something dirtier? My property sat on an old inspection access line from the pre-updated sewage grid. Most residents had theirs capped decades ago, but my home had been retrofitted with a smart septic-to-greywater test valve. I had left the plumbing isolated, but the connection was still physically viable for non-consumption systems. I called a contractor friend, Troy, who specialized in pressure redirection systems. We talked shop. We planned carefully. By Monday, I had what I needed. A bypass splitter with a remote-activated valve switch, perfectly legal, perfectly ridiculous. I ran a test the next morning using dummy tanks and dummy pressure. The system worked. The moment the hose was yanked and water was requested through the smart head, a triggered command could flip the source. If someone happened to be holding it on the wrong side of the fence, well, let's just say it would be less of a garden cleanse and more of a karma rinse. But I didn't want to risk harming anyone, physically or legally. I made sure the contents would be sanitary but foul-smelling, runoff water from an old dechlorinated tank, mixed with garden sludge and just enough sulfur compound to ruin someone's day but not their skin. I even confirmed it with Mia, my compliance officer friend. The prank would be legal. Morally justified? Some might argue. But after what I saw next, I had no doubts. Karen invited me to her next event, mockingly. She sent an envelope to my porch with gold-embossed lettering. Sparedix. Guests may use garden hose to rinse. It's a communal good. I laughed out loud. She had no shame. Not only had she stolen my property, but she was now declaring it some kind of community amenity. So I buried the bypass valve in the mulch. I reprogrammed the hose sensor. I triple-checked the system. And I waited. That Saturday, the sun rose bright and obnoxious. I made coffee, turned on my monitor feed, and watched the setup unfold. Karen, in her gaudiest beach dress yet, lined up her guests in the backyard. They were laughing, clinking glasses, and snapping selfies. And then, as if destiny knew its cue, Karen reached over the fence and yanked the hose. My finger hovered above the app switch, and I pressed it. The moment I pressed the switch, I felt the same thrill a magician must feel when pulling off the perfect illusion. I didn't expect immediate results. After all, Karen's party hadn't yet descended into its usual hose-centered chaos, but the system was primed and ready. My outdoor cam, mounted just above the trellis, gave me a perfect wide-angle view of the setup. It was all happening again. Guests were lounging in folding chairs, Karen was flitting about like the host of a spa resort, and my garden hose, my property, was looped through that same illegal gap in the fence like it lived there. The arrogance was astounding. But what she didn't know, what made it all so delicious, was that the second someone tried to run water through it, the pressure would be rerouted. Not to my clean line, but to the auxiliary tank connected to that garden sludge system. She was about to serve sewage with a smile. I watched as one of her guests, a bearded man in cargo swim trunks, picked up the hose and pointed it at a cluster of patio chairs. He turned the handle. A sputter. Then a gurgle. Nothing yet. He shook the hose and turned again. A wet pop. Then, faintly, the hiss of liquid rushing. That was it. The trap had been triggered. I could almost hear the line activate from my office. But before the water hit, Karen stepped in. She grabbed the nozzle midstream, likely to demonstrate her famous full-body rinse technique, as she'd called it last time. The look on her face as the first blast of murky, brownish, sulfur-laced water rocketed from the hose was something I would remember forever. One moment she was smiling, basking in the glory of her party, and the next her jaw dropped in horror as the stench hit her. The spray hit her shoulder, then her torso, and the screams started almost immediately. The bearded man fell backward, slipping on the now-slick patio. A woman in a white cover-up let out a sound halfway between a shriek and a gag. The entire lounge area erupted in chaos. People ran. People slipped. Someone tripped over a flower pot and tumbled into the kiddie pool, which instantly turned into a muddy nightmare. Karen dropped the hose and tried to run, but the stream caught her square in the back as she turned. Her once golden sundress now looked like it had been dragged through a compost heap. And still the hose sprayed, flailing like a wild snake until it was finally tossed aside. I watched in stunned silence, the laughter building until I couldn't hold it anymore. Tango, my dog, barked along as I leaned back, wiping tears from my eyes. It had worked. It had all worked. The footage alone was gold. Every angle clear, every scream audible, and the horror on Karen's face so perfectly timed it could have won an award. I knew this was going to live on Reddit for years. But of course, Karen being Karen, she wasn't about to take this lying down. About 20 minutes after the flush heard round the fence, she showed up at my front door in a poncho that barely concealed the damage. She didn't ring the bell. She banged on it with the fury of someone who'd just lost a war. I opened the door slowly, coffee in hand. Her face was blotchy with rage. Before I could even say a word, she shouted, "You did this!" I sipped my coffee. Did what, exactly? You sabotaged the water line. You replaced it with waste. You're disgusting. My guests were covered in garden runoff, I interrupted. Legally non-toxic. And only accessible through my private hose, on my private property. She screamed something unintelligible, waving her arms. You can't do that. You'll be arrested. I calmly stepped outside and tapped the small camera mounted under my awning. I have 4 separate recordings of you trespassing, stealing water, and damaging my fence. Would you like to see them? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You're insane. No, I said, smiling. I'm very, very patient. She stomped off, but I knew that wouldn't be the last of her. And I was right. The next day, I received an email from the HOA. Not an official one. Just a neighborly message from the actual board president, Greg, saying Karen had filed a complaint. Apparently, she accused me of deliberate water poisoning and assault by hose. Greg, fortunately, wasn't an idiot. He had seen the earlier footage I'd sent him when Karen first stole the hose. His reply was short and sweet. She's made herself a joke. We're not pursuing this. But if you've got more footage, I wouldn't mind a laugh. I took that as a green light. Meanwhile, the video from my cam footage made its way onto Reddit. I posted it anonymously under a burner account. I titled it, Entitled Neighbor Steals Hose. Gets the pressure she deserves. Within an hour, it had 3,000 upvote. Within 6, it was trending on r/entitled people. The comments were a glorious blend of shock, laughter, and praise. By the time the local gossip grapevine caught wind of it, Karen's backyard reputation was in ruins. Someone even turned a screenshot of her shocked expression into a meme. My favorite was a caption that read, "When you want cucumber water but get the sewer special." I printed that one out and framed it above my workbench. But Karen wasn't done yet. Oh no. She was wounded, and like any wounded Karen, she doubled down. I noticed her front yard now had 2 motion lights, and she had installed a "no trespassing" sign on her own side of the fence, which was ironic, considering she was the one trespassing on mine. Then came the flyering. That weekend, she handed out little folded notes around the block, warning neighbors about me. She called me a backyard saboteur, and claimed I was tampering with municipal systems to harass a friendly neighbor. Some people took it seriously, until they watched the video. Then the laughter returned. I tried to keep my head down, stay out of the drama, but part of me enjoyed it. I had played by the rules. I had protected my property. And most importantly, I had done it without breaking the law. That's what made it so infuriating for Karen. She couldn't get me in trouble. She couldn't outsmart me. And now the whole neighborhood was laughing behind her back. That Monday, I received another package. This time, it wasn't angry. It was a box of cupcakes from one of the newer neighbors down the block, a woman named Riley. Inside was a note, "Best hose defense I've ever seen. If you ever do a part 2, I'll bring the popcorn." I chuckled and bit into a salted caramel cupcake. It tasted like victory. The days that followed were quieter. Karen seemed to stay inside more, and the once steady stream of loud music and backyard drama dwindled. I noticed the gap in the fence had been boarded up hastily with scrap wood. No more hose theft. No more parties. At least, not yet. But I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end. Karen had taken a hit, but she wasn't out of the game. She was brewing something, plotting. I could feel it in the air. People like her didn't just retreat. They regrouped. So I made some upgrades, reinforced the valve system, added another camera, synced everything to my cloud storage. And I waited. Because if Karen thought the hose war was over, she was in for one more pressure surprise. By the following weekend, the neighborhood buzz had turned into a quiet undercurrent of anticipation. It wasn't just my viral video or Karen's backyard catastrophe that had people whispering. It was the feeling that something more was coming. People walked their dogs a little slower past her house. Lawn chairs were positioned a bit closer to fences. Even the mailman had started lingering a little longer near my gate, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever absurd escalation might come next. And deep down, I knew it was coming too. Karen was far too prideful to let things go. After everything, she was going to try something. The only question was when. On Thursday, the answer arrived. Literally. In the form of a printed flyer slid under my door and stuck to every mailbox within 3 blocks. It was glossy, double-sided, and completely insane. It read, Karen's Garden Spa Reopening, a reclaimed celebration of community and wellness. Below that, in smaller type, was a passive-aggressive jab that made me laugh out loud. Guests welcome to rinse with high-pressure garden flow, sustainably sourced from the neighborhood. No signature, of course, but it might as well have come with a picture of her winking. She was throwing another party. Despite everything. Despite the footage, the memes, the viral Reddit fame, and the fact that she'd been humiliated in front of half the town. She was inviting people back into the same yard, the same fence line, and worst of all, the same plan to steal my hose. Except this time, she thought she was being clever. The phrase, sustainably sourced, was her way of daring me to stop her again. I sat on the porch swing that night, sipping my tea while Tango gnawed on a chew toy, and stared at the fence. The section she'd previously pulled the hose through had been patched, sure, but a few planks down, a new gap had appeared, disguised just enough to be subtle but obvious to anyone watching closely. She was preparing for round 2, and she thought I'd be too cautious to strike again. Or worse, that I'd try something stupid and illegal. What she didn't know was that I'd already updated everything, refined the prank, tested the system, and added a few new features. This time, the hose wasn't connected to just one auxiliary tank. I had routed it through a split-chamber setup with 2 different options, both legally sourced and safe, but one with a unique twist. One chamber held the same harmless, sulfur-laced graywater, but the second was filled with what I now called garden molasses, a thick, muddy concoction of water, soil, organic fertilizer, and just enough liquefied compost to ruin someone's clothes and their social standing. Both options could be toggled through a remote valve. This time, the chaos would be worse, wetter, and much, much stickier. Saturday morning arrived with the heat of a grudge. Karen's yard was alive with noise again. Guests arriving in colorful robes, fold-out tables stacked with fruit platters, candles, and rows of cheap wine bottles wrapped in twine. Someone was playing soft spa music from a Bluetooth speaker. And right on schedule, the hose disappeared from its holster on my side of the fence. I had placed it there deliberately, leaving just enough slack to tempt her. Like bait in a trap. From my hidden camera feed, I watched the hose slide through the opening. I could see the legs of the person doing it. Tall. Probably Karen's nephew, the same guy who helped her last time. I tapped my phone, activated the alert sequence, and toggled to tank 2. The molasses mix was primed. I switched screens to the wide-angle view just in time to catch Karen giving some sort of speech to her guest. She stood on an elevated garden stone, arms raised like she was leading a revival. Her voice, muffled by the distance, rang out loud enough to pick up words like healing, natural rinse, and restorative waters. Then she reached for the hose. The first person she aimed at was a woman in a silky white sundress. Karen sprayed. For half a second, the hose sputtered. Then it exploded like a fire hose filled with chocolate syrup. A thick, dark stream launched into the woman's chest, coating her instantly. She shrieked, flailing her arms, but Karen was already turning, too shocked to control the flow. The nozzle whipped and sprayed, splashing 3 other guests. The stream hit a tray of fruit, sent strawberries flying, and splattered the entire buffet table. One man tried to duck and slipped, sliding face-first into a folding chair that collapsed under him. Karen screamed, still holding the hose, as the flow poured over her arms, soaking her from neck to knees in muddy, gooey garden compost. The guests fled. People slipped. Someone knocked over a table, and the Bluetooth speaker died with a sad glug as it hit the puddle. It was carnage. Not dangerous, not illegal, but glorious visual comedy. Karen finally dropped the hose and ran into her house. The others scattered, muttering, some barefoot, some covered in the sticky mess, others laughing in disbelief. One woman turned to her friend and said, loud enough for the camera to catch it, "Who throws a second party after the sewer incident?" I saved that audio clip. I waited 30 minutes before Karen came storming toward my gate. This time, she didn't knock. She marched right up and began shouting through the door. "I'm calling the city. You've escalated this. You're going to pay for this." I stepped outside, calm as ever, holding my phone. "Karen, you walked onto my property again. You stole my hose. You used it on your guest. Again. It's community water. It was accessible. Accessible because you pulled it through a hole you made in the fence." She was fuming, shaking, muddy water still drying on her sleeves. "This is harassment." I hit play on my phone, and the audio of her own guest came through loud and clear. "Who throws a second party after the sewer incident?" Karen blinked. I let the silence drag just long enough before continuing. "You've trespassed. Again. You've tampered with my property. Again. And this time, there's evidence from 4 different angles. I'll sue you." "For what?" "Providing your guests with the restorative natural rinse you advertised." Karen looked like she was going to explode. But she didn't. Instead, she turned and stomped back down the sidewalk, slipping once in the trail of mud she had left behind. That night, I posted the new video. Same burner account. Title: Karen doubled down. So did the hose. It surpassed the original within a day. The comments were even better this time. People posting reaction GIFs, calling it the best sequel in Reddit prank history. My personal favorite was someone who commented, "At this point, the hose deserves a Netflix deal." What surprised me most, though, was the response from the neighborhood. More people than ever waved at me while walking by. A few even dropped off thank you notes or cookies. A guy on the corner with a garage band wrote a jingle called Pressure and Privilege. He emailed me a copy. Karen, meanwhile, had vanished. No more parties. No flyers. Her yard was quiet. But I knew she wasn't done. She was regrouping again. People like her don't disappear. They simmer. So I cleaned the system. Refilled the tank. Upgraded the sensors. Tango watched me from the patio, tail wagging. Because round 3 was coming. And next time I'd be ready. For nearly a week, there was silence from the other side of the fence. The usual chaos of Karen's backyard gave way to a strange stillness. No lawn chairs dragged across the patio, no shrieking laughter, no whirring portable speakers playing spa music on loop. It was like someone had hit pause on her ego. But I didn't trust it for a second. Karen wasn't the kind of person who took a hit and retreated gracefully. She was the kind who plotted. Quiet Karen was dangerous Karen. So while she laid low, I stayed alert. My hose stayed on its mount, right where she could see it. Not that she'd dare steal it a third time, or so I thought. Every time I glanced out the window, I saw that patched-up section of the fence. The fresh planks were lighter than the rest, drawing the eye like a blinking neon sign. Karen had reinforced them since the last disaster, but not to secure her property, only to make sure she could be accused of trespass again. It was smoke and mirrors. If she was done with her antics, I'd eat my hat. 3 days after the garden molasses incident, I got an email from the HOA. The subject line alone made me choke on my coffee. Formal complaint submitted, hostile landscaping. When I opened the file, I saw Karen had taken photos of her guests covered in the sludge and captioned them like crime scene evidence. One photo showed a woman mid-scream, mud flying across her face. Another showed a man on the ground, his robe ruined. Karen had circled my hose in bright red ink and written, "Deliberate Sabotage System," under it like she was submitting evidence to the FBI. I called Greg, the HOA president, half expecting him to be serious. But when he answered, he was already laughing. "Look, man, I had to forward it because she's threatening legal escalation. But between you and me, half the board has seen your videos and thinks she's out of her mind. You've got more than enough footage showing her trespassing." I asked if I needed to respond. He said not officially. Then added, "Just be careful. I wouldn't put it past her to escalate in some creative way." He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Karen escalated. It started when I saw a stranger walking around my side yard. He was wearing cargo shorts and a polo with a city utilities badge clipped to his chest. I stepped outside calmly, coffee in hand, and asked if I could help him. He introduced himself as Ray from Municipal Water Services. Said he was investigating a complaint of cross-contamination involving redirected waste lines. My stomach sank, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew exactly who had sent him. I invited Ray in, showed him the garden setup, walked him through the auxiliary system, and handed him printed documentation from the inspection I'd done with Mia's help. I even showed him the smart valve logs and explained how the system never connected to the main potable supply. It took about 20 minutes for Ray to realize what was going on. "She said you were pumping sewer water onto people," he muttered, shaking his head. "I was pumping legally isolated greywater into my own hose," I clarified. "Which she stole. Twice." He looked up, brow raised. "She stole the hose?" "Every time." Ray sighed and closed his folder. "This job's made me step in a lot of things. But this takes the cake. You're good, man. Honestly, I hope you recorded it." I smiled and pointed toward the nearest camera. The moment Ray left, I spotted Karen standing at her window, peeking through the blind. I gave her a cheerful wave. She didn't wave back. That evening, I uploaded a new clip. No pranks. No sludge. Just a calm breakdown of the system I'd built, complete with documentation. Title: Karen sent the city after me. Here's what they found. It was more educational than entertaining, but the views still poured in. People appreciated the transparency. And once again, the tide of public opinion was not on Karen's side. But the real storm came at the next HOA meeting. It was a Tuesday evening, held in the local community center. I almost didn't attend. I preferred to keep my distance from the HOA's drama. But I had a feeling Karen would try to use the official setting to turn the tables, and I wasn't about to let that happen without being there to respond. I showed up 10 minutes early, sat in the back, and watched the room fill up. Karen walked in 5 minutes late wearing a cream blazer and carrying a folder thick with printed emails and blurry screenshot. Her confidence radiated like heat off asphalt. The meeting began with the usual updates: budget allocations, community events, reminders about trash pickup. Then came community concerns, and Karen stood up like she'd been waiting her entire life for this performance. "I'd like to formally address a growing concern regarding hostile property modifications," she said, stepping to the center of the room. "Certain residents have created systems that endanger neighbors and guests. I'm referring specifically to the man behind me." She didn't use my name, but all eyes turned to me anyway. I stayed seated. She waved her folder in the air like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "Twice now, my guests have been sprayed with foul, possibly contaminated water due to an elaborate system he installed. I have photos, I have timestamps, and I have filed a city complaint. This is not just a prank. This is environmental sabotage." The room was silent for a moment. Then Greg leaned forward and cleared his throat. "Karen, I believe you forgot to mention the part where you removed property that wasn't yours. Twice." That's irrelevant, she snapped. It's not, said another board member, a woman named Deirdre. He has footage. You pulled the hose through the fence both times. You used it without permission. Karen faltered but didn't sit down. He tampered with it on purpose. It's malicious. Someone near the front chuckled. Then someone else did. Within seconds, quiet laughter rippled through the room. One guy near the door muttered, "Didn't she call it sustainably sourced in that flyer?" A burst of louder laughter followed. Karen's face turned red. She tried to recover. "I just want the board to take action. I'm not asking for punishment, just regulation. We need to make sure no one else suffers through such disgusting behavior." Greg leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. "We already looked into it. His system is legal, safe, and fully documented. You're the one who crossed the property line. Twice." Karen looked like she might cry, scream, or both. She sat down without another word. I didn't even need to speak. The board had done the job for me. The rest of the meeting was a blur, and by the time I stepped outside, people were patting me on the back, thanking me for standing up to her, laughing about the whole incident like it was the highlight of the neighborhood year. One guy even said, "You're doing the Lord's work, man. Keep that hose locked and loaded." I went home that night feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Karen had tried every trick she had. Flyers, legal threats, government reports, public shaming, and every one of them had backfired. She wasn't just losing the battle. She was losing the audience. Still, I wasn't cocky enough to think she was done. People like Karen don't give up. They recalibrate. They hide behind politeness, pretend to change tactics, and then come back twice as nasty. But I wasn't the same quiet neighbor she thought she could steamroll. If she came for the hose again, I'd be waiting. And next time, the pressure wasn't the only thing that would hit hard. The days after the HOA meeting felt like a cleansing rain had swept through the neighborhood. There was a noticeable shift in the air, like some invisible weight had lifted off everyone's shoulders. The neighbors who had once kept their heads down around Karen were now exchanging casual grins and inside jokes. I'd step outside and find someone walking past with their dog, giving me a knowing look and saying something like, "Still got that hose locked up?" Or, "If you ever go into plumbing full-time, I'll be your first customer." The entire street had transformed into a community, united not by shared interests, but by shared amusement at one woman's inability to take a hint. Karen, on the other hand, had gone almost completely silent. Her blinds were always drawn. Her usual patio decorations had been taken down. Even her garden, which she used to overwater obsessively, was now brown and wilted in the summer heat. The same woman who once screamed about curb appeal and threatened citations over dandelions was now hiding behind untrimmed hedges and silence. For most people, that would have signaled defeat. But for Karen, it meant she was recharging. Lying low was just her way of laying a trap. I didn't relax. I stayed ready. I checked my outdoor cameras twice a day. I upgraded the hose system again, adding a smart tag that would ping my phone the moment it was disconnected. Not just a pressure drop, but physical movement. I also installed a decoy setup, a second hose on a decorative reel near the back gate, that looked real but wasn't connected to anything. If she tried to steal it, it would record her face in full HD and spray a harmless but brightly colored dye. It was a decoy trap, not meant to humiliate, but to confirm if she crossed the line again. I had a feeling she would. I didn't have to wait long. On a warm Friday morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, I received a notification. Motion detected. Back fence. Hose movement. Tango barked at the same time, his head snapping toward the yard. I set my mug down and checked the feed. There she was. Karen, crouching, wearing gloves and sunglasses, as if that somehow made her invisible. She tugged at the fake hose and looked around like a child stealing cookies. The moment it came loose from the reel, the dye pack activated, a quiet burst of blue liquid spraying over her hands and arms. Her shriek echoed across the yard as she stumbled back, falling into her flower bed. I stood and walked casually toward the fence, stopping at the corner where I knew she could hear me. I didn't say a word. Just whistled a cheerful tune and tapped the camera pole twice. She didn't respond. She was already retreating into her house, covered in blue, looking more like a cartoon villain than a neighborhood menace. I expected her to disappear again, maybe file another complaint, maybe act like it never happened. But that night, everything shifted. At around 10:30, I was watching a movie when someone knocked at the door. Not banged. Not yelled. A real, polite knock. I opened the door and found Karen standing there, arms crossed, no blue stains in sight, wearing what I could only describe as an uncomfortable smile. I didn't speak first. I just waited. "I want to talk," she said, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Not argue. Just talk." That alone was enough to make me raise an eyebrow, but I nodded and stepped aside. She stayed on the porch. "I've had a rough few weeks," she started. Clearly. I didn't respond. And I realize I might have overstepped. Several times. I waited again. "I wanted to prove something," she continued, "and I went too far. I'm not here to apologize exactly, because I still think you took it a little too far too. Karen," I said finally, "you stole my hose. You sprayed your guest. You filed false complaints. You sent the city to my door." Her jaw tightened. "And you retaliated by building a pressure-triggered compost cannon." I didn't deny it. It was effective. She sighed and looked out toward the street. "The truth is, I hate being laughed at. I hate feeling powerless. I used to be respected around here. People came to me for advice, for help. Then suddenly, I'm the joke." I crossed my arms. "Maybe stop treating everyone like you own the block." She didn't argue that. Just nodded slightly. "I can't undo everything. And I'm not good at saying sorry. But I came to say I won't touch your stuff again. I'll stay on my side. And I'll stop trying to run this place like I'm queen of the cul-de-sac." There was a long pause between us. I watched her, waiting for some hidden camera crew to jump out. But nothing happened. It wasn't heartfelt, it wasn't perfect, but it was a shift. A slow, awkward acknowledgement that the battle had finally exhausted her. I nodded once. That's all I needed. She turned and walked away. I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party. But I did sleep better that night. The next week, something strange happened. I got a package on my doorstep with no return label. Inside was a small, high-end hose nozzle attachment and a handwritten card. The card read, "In case you ever want to rinse peacefully again." No pressure intended. No signature. But I knew it was from her. I installed the nozzle. Used it the next morning to rinse out a flower pot. For the first time in months, I didn't check over the fence while doing it. Tango lay in the sun, yawning, calm. Later that day, I received a call from Greg at the HOA. He was laughing again. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen's stepping down from the beautification committee." "She was never on it," I replied. "She was. She just appointed herself." We both laughed. Things quieted down after that. No more parties. No more flyers. The fence stayed whole. People started gardening again. A little girl across the street set up a lemonade stand, and Karen actually bought a cup. Word spread like wildfire. One neighbor shouted from his porch, "Is the world ending?" But the world wasn't ending. It was healing. Because sometimes, all it takes to restore order is one boundary being enforced, one stolen hose turned into poetic justice. And while I never set out to be the neighborhood enforcer, it turns out a little bit of pressure can wash away a lot of entitlement. Tango and I spent more time in the yard after that. I added some new flower beds, fixed up the fence, and even started building a small koi pond. Peace returned, not just to my yard, but to the entire street. And every now and then, I'd catch Karen looking over from her porch. Not with spite, not with smugness, but something closer to thoughtfulness. One afternoon, she walked by while I was planting and gave me a nod. Just a nod. Nothing more. But that single gesture said everything. We didn't have to be friends. We didn't even have to like each other. But from now on, the hose stayed in my yard, and the peace stayed right where it belonged.